Welcome to another edition of the CDG BizCast. I'm your host, Christian Gonzalez, co-owner of Creativity Design Group, a digital marketing firm in Houston, Texas. My guests today include Chef Jay and Face Down Tragedy from the After the Shuffle show, my correspondent in the United Kingdom, Lauren Hicks, scambaiter Cora Kathleen from YouTube channel CorasAtHerCorner, and Army veteran Justin Rayl. Today we will be discussing military scams and what signs to look out for and how you can avoid falling for these scams. These scams are basically the usual romance scams, but with a small twist to them. The scammer pretends that they are in the military, usually active or retired, and we're going to learn more about what you can do to stay safe from these scams. Justin, please tell us more about how these scams operate and what everybody should look out for to avoid falling for them.
Well, first of all, just so everybody is aware, I'm a retired veteran who was given a medical discharge from military service because of a psychiatric disorder that was a result of military service. And one of the things that they make sure that you are aware of when you are in the military is that while you are deployed to a combat zone, you will not have access to your smartphone or any internet-capable device that they do not hand you and directly authorize you to use through them, because all social media posts by rank and file soldiers on deployment are required to be authorized by the commanding base officer for their detachment in the war zone. Therefore, if they claim to be on active duty, that's an automatic red flag, because they would not have the time or energy to attend to a scam if they are actually active duty. Number one, because they won't have their phone, and number two, because they'll be using their monthly salary at the base commissary to purchase their own equipment needs that are not being provided directly to them as a result of their military duties. And that's why if someone is claiming to be in the military and they're a romance scammer, you need to be an automatic red flag if they're contacting you about needing money to get home, because the U.S. Department of Defense and Homeland Security, which controls the Department of Defense, makes sure that all service members have a pathway to go all the way from their active duty deployment to their front door from their discharge base when they are assigned inactive duty regiments when they are on leave.
Very informative. The general public, the civilians, they usually do not understand the process of discharge when somebody who was active duty is making their way back home, and if they are discharged for any reason. And I also want to talk about some general red flags of a romance scam, and these apply to any type of romance scam, not just the military ones, to also help our listeners get an understanding of how these scams operate. It's usually someone who, from the very start, they start messaging you via social media or on a dating app, but they're already interested in you, just from the get-go, like that. And they're already asking for you to send them money. They might send fake pictures of themselves, pretending to be someone else using a stock image they found online. And it just looks very fishy. I mean, it doesn't make sense for somebody, a total stranger, to be that interested in you to begin with. Now, how it works with these military scams is that it's the same principles, but the wording that they give is twisted to make it sound like that they are in the military, and they're usually trying to say that they need money to get home. That's not how it works. You can't just pay somebody to get them out of the army or any branch of the military to get them home.
That is correct. And in fact, in order to even be processed home, first your leave from the deployment zone has to be authorized by the commander in the deployment zone, and then you're transferred to a domestic friendly base on the same operations theater of the continent for which you are there before you are sent to the U.S. So it can be several weeks before you actually get home once your discharge leave has been approved.
Right.
For you to go to inactive duty, because you have to be transferred, especially in the age of COVID. It's going to take that much longer because of the difficulty in making sure that the flights have been correctly sanitized to minimize your chances of getting COVID and not being able to redeploy for 6 months.
Mhm. Right. Those are all things that many people most likely do not understand. They don't know that that's how the process works.
On top of that, with the discharge, once you've been transferred back to your U.S. discharge base, they typically do a 2 to 4 week decompression time to help you transition back to a civilian calendar schedule in what's called a headed home company unit, where the restrictions are a little more relaxed. You don't have to follow as strict of a schedule, although you probably will anyway, and it'll allow you to adjust your bio clock back to a U.S. domestic time zone, because you will have been on the other side of the world living in that time zone, and military schedules tend to be a little crazy anyhow. I actually have a cousin who passed away of energy drink caffeine poisoning because his military schedule was so crazy that he couldn't function without it, and it ultimately caused a fatal heart attack because of caffeine poisoning, because of how alert you're required to stay in a combat zone in order to make sure that you actually make it out of there alive.
Yeah, that is sad, because I know someone who had cancer, leg cancer or something, from energy drinks. So that's sad, knowing that, these people have so much pressure on themselves that they have to put their health at risk.
Yes, and it really is sad. One thing that some people may not understand is that one of the first things they do when you go to basic is they confiscate anything that you bring with you that can access the internet, smartwatch, phone, tablet, computer, whatever. Anything capable of accessing the internet, they will confiscate in basic. And additionally, they do not let you have caffeine in basic either, because it's known to alter your heart rate and can impair your ability to cope with the stress of the battlefield. And on top of that, some people may not know this, but caffeine is actually a psychoactive drug, which can, in some cases, cause periodic psychosis if you have certain amounts of it in your system, especially if you're coming off of it after having coffee every morning. If you go to basic training and go from a coffee every morning to no caffeine at all, the withdrawal can actually cause symptoms similar to that of alcohol withdrawal, and in some cases can kill you.
Yeah, with my health conditions, when I went, basically I suffer with health conditions where exercise can make it worse, literally. And when I was going to the gym, I had to have energy drinks every time I went, just to be able to get stuff done in the gym. And it really messed me up. And I've obviously not had energy drinks for years now, but I can't have caffeine at all because it really messes my heart up and stuff.
And see, with me, I've always been like a caffeine addict majority of my life. There's twice now, this is the second time I've gotten myself off of caffeine, and it's like that first day without caffeine fully eased a huge headache. Huge.
Yeah.
Yes.
It makes you want to, it makes you not want to drink it anymore. I haven't touched it in quite a while, and I hope it stays away. I notice once a week I'll give myself like a Coke. But I'm not gonna get back into that ever again. That I'm gonna try.
I even have one. Sometimes I do that. I'll get like a bottle of pop or a can of pop, and then I'm regretting it an hour later. It's horrible.
Yeah, I'll be honest about myself too. And Justin, I'm sorry to hear about your cousin. For myself, I'm a huge caffeine addict. I always feel the need whenever I go out to eat somewhere that my drink of choice always has to be either Dr. Pepper or something with caffeine in it. But I definitely see what you're talking about in terms of how it affected him and how it affects your sleep schedule and stuff. And I can understand exactly why the military does not want you consuming all that caffeine when you join. It's very understandable. They want you to be able to adapt to these different types of sleep patterns. In some cases, you don't even get to go to sleep at all, right?
There's been times where there have been military soldiers who have been documented to have to be awake for 72 consecutive hours without sleep on its own can actually cause psychosis on its own, believe it or not. It's actually been documented that if you go for longer than 72 hours without sleep, that you go clinically insane.
Right. Wow.
Because it starts to alter your brain. At 75 hours, you begin to experience micro sleep. And at that point, if you do not spend some time powered down, you're going to go into a psychotic meltdown. The military's done studies on this back in the 50s, I think it was. And that's why they do not allow trainees to have caffeine. And I was a caffeine addict myself in 2007, working for Walmart, which was a job even higher stress, in my opinion, than the military. And I was drinking 37 liters of Mountain Dew a week, which comes out to 6 days a week at 6 and a partial liters a day. Walmart was high stress because they were asking me to throw 45,000 pounds of freight every day, which they were expecting a crew of one person to do that in 40 hours a week.
Right.
And that's really the job of an 18-man crew.
Yeah, I've heard that they can be pretty unrealistic at times. They pay less than what they make their workers work for.
I agree. I worked in retail for 6 years. Completely agree.
Let's go ahead and cover some military scam red flag. Yes, Justin, aside from the information you share with us, what can civilians expect to see if they get a message from a possible military fraudster, somebody who's pretending to be in the military but really isn't, and they're just being a scammer? What can civilians expect to see? What messages would they send out, and what would they be receiving?
The difference will be is that you're getting a message at all, because while you're on deployment, you're not allowed to have a phone on you.
Right.
Until you're in a friendly base outside the war zone, you do not have access to your phone.
Being that these scammers don't know any of that, and they're just simply pretending to be in the military, what do they usually ask victims when they send them messages?
Usually for assistance with getting home to a loved one, or for child care expenses to pay their nanny, which actually, if you are in the military and you are deployed with kids, your spouse is automatically granted full-time custody until you come home.
Mm-hmm. So many of these scammers who write these messages out, they don't know any of that stuff. These people who are scammers have never even been in the military, so they don't know any of that. That's why it's important to educate the general public on how these scams work and why somebody in the military can't possibly be sending you messages asking for money.
Yeah, because they're not going to have their phone with them to even contact you.
Right.
The only person they're going to be talking to, other than their dabble buddy in the war zone, will probably be their commander at their deployment base.
Right.
Wherever it is they're staying while they're in the combat zone. Which I find really annoying that scammers would pretend to be a military soldier anyway, because that's a high-value job with quite a low rate of return on your investment of what you'll put in.
It's a high-value job that is being portrayed by a low-value person, a criminal.
Yeah, someone who hasn't got the balls to go to the army.
Exactly.
Let alone survive it.
Exactly. The United States Army's Criminal Investigation Division lists several signs of what to look for on their website. The very first thing they list in big bold letters is do not send money. You're supposed to be extremely suspicious if you're asked for money for transportation costs, communication fees, marriage processing, or medical fees through Western Union. And again, there's no reason why you would send somebody money in the military for any of this, so especially communications fees.
Yes, because they're receiving a monthly salary, and they won't even have access to communications equipment,
Right.
other than to talk to other military soldiers in the combat zone.
Right.
They can't afford to have the soldiers typing on Facebook Messenger when they're getting shot at, when they need to be shooting at the enemy.
Exactly. And a lot of this information that you're sharing really needs to be listed on their website, on this page. that lists what to look for. A lot of the stuff you're saying needs to be mentioned on there, that they don't have access to phones and other little things like that. You've given a lot more than what that page is describing. And this is the information that people really need to hear to understand that when they're talking to these scammers, they're not talking to a real active military person.
Yeah, and it really, you'd think it would be more obvious that somebody in the military is not going to be on their phone because they're not going to have time.
Right.
Because every minute you're not in the war, every minute you're not out walking around with your gun shooting at the enemy being shot at, you're probably going to be trying to sleep or take care of your basic hygiene needs.
Right.
Brushing your teeth, washing your uniform, washing yourself, cleaning your equipment. You're not going to have time or energy to contact anybody back home.
That's correct.
When you're on deployment.
These scammers have every all the time on in the world, like to scam people. You know, they seem to have every second of the day. Yet in reality, army people don't have every second of the day.
They might have 5 minutes to use the base commander's computer to send a text message to a family member back home, a spouse or something, if they need authorization for something that requires both partners to authorize and sign off on. They might have 5 spare minutes to contact a spouse or an ex-spouse that's taking care of the kids. They're not going to have time to contact a potential love interest who's not directly family. And the military does not even allow you access to your social media accounts until you come home, until you are off base in the USA, until you are at the airport or waiting for the taxi, when you have retrieved your phone from your storage unit where your phone was being stored at on the base in lockdown, where nobody could access it except the janitor with the key.
And mostly these scams are going to be related to usually, I would say, a romance scam or some other kind of heartstring pulling type scam to solicit, like, say, for medical bills they're saying they're going unpaid, or documentation or some paperwork that needs to be paid for, or other different type of fees, maneuver fees and so forth. But I would say, from my experience, most of these are romance scams, or start as romance scams.
So there's been a group of us too. We were messing with some scammers on Facebook, and actually there was been a couple that claimed they were in the military and stuff, and here they are. They can message us all they want, but we're like, oh, let's do a video chat. Let's do a video chat. Then they would make up some excuse like, well, I haven't paid my phone bill. I haven't paid my phone bill. I can't call. And it's like with Facebook Messenger, if you're using
a video
Facebook,
call on Facebook, if you're using Facebook Messenger, that call is free. Other than
Exactly.
It's free.
It's free, no charge.
And we still call the video chat anyways. Pick up. And there's been like a couple times where they did pick up, and of course it is not exactly the person that was in the picture either. It's like we knew it was a scammer, but it's like still they're stupid enough to pick it up. There was one time where it was a kid, and his mom's just laughing about it in the background. Like, this is a kid probably over somewhere. I think we had him click the link, and it was somewhere over in Africa, and his mom was laughing about it as one of the other ones was trying to say, this is wrong. What you're doing is wrong, and his mom's just laughing about it in the background. And it's sad that there's kids over there that have parents like that that's encouraging this behavior, these crimes.
On the Army's website, that's one of the red flags. It says, be very suspicious if the person you're corresponding with wants you to mail anything to an African country. They may actually be what they call a 419 scammer. 419 is the criminal code for fraud in Nigeria. And these scammers pretend to be all sorts of different people, from military veterans to someone who just inherited a lot of money and they want you to be their business partner, to some prince who claims they have an inheritance that they want to share with you. And I mean, think about it this way. Why would a complete stranger be that generous to share all that money with another complete stranger just because? Doesn't make sense.
I wouldn't be. I wouldn't even share that kind of money with my family. Based on the way my siblings have treated me, I would not share that with them.
Exactly.
Never mind
I'm the
strangers.
same.
Exactly.
And then I would call my creditors and pay them off. And treat myself to a nice little holiday.
I was just about to say, or buy something for yourself.
Yeah, I wouldn't give that much money to a stranger because who knows what that stranger is going to do with that money.
Exactly. And a stranger overseas somewhere is no different than a stranger here at home. In general, when it comes to these scammers, just don't give them any money. If you don't know the person, they are not entitled to get any money from you, period.
Exactly. And, that's one of the things that really makes me angry about the scammers who pretend to be these disabled homeless veterans. Yeah, they may be homeless, but unless they actually are a homeless veteran, which there's plenty of help they can go get at the VA, that's what the VA's there for, but they just don't seem to want to put in the effort, and that really makes me mad, because they'd rather rip off civilians than file for the benefits they earned with their service for the genuine veterans who are homeless on the side of the road. And that's one thing that really makes me mad about the scammers who are pretending to be honorable people of society on the side of the road.
Yeah, I've heard about that some of those people who are on the side of the road, they're not even real veterans at all. They're just pretending to be. Sometimes they'll even get a uniform somewhere and pretend to be an actual veteran wearing a stolen uniform that they poached from somebody else.
And some homeless people have homes as well. They're not really homeless.
Yeah, some of these people actually have homes where they have mortgages, some of them up to $1,250 a month, that they are making enough to cover their expenses on the side of the road like that. And that really makes me mad.
It's horrible.
Because that's just outright theft.
There was one woman, she was using she was pregnant or something. There was another one using a child as well, pretending to be homeless when they weren't really homeless in the States.
I heard about that. That made me unbelievably angry when I heard about that.
Yeah, it's shameful what these tactics these people pull to try to scam others. They play the sympathy card to win your trust.
People who are homeless, there's plenty of help. They just have to go search it out and show up at the homeless shelter where they can get the real effective help they need. And most of the people, in my opinion, who are genuinely homeless on the side of the road like that, they just want money for alcohol.
That's actually a very common case. Over in the city of Houston, which is not far from me, there have been times where they had to just get rid of panhandling altogether by rounding them all up and putting them in jail because they were finding out too many times that these were fraudster homeless people. These people were already had homes, they had families, they were just trying to get money so they could go buy beer.
So in the city I live in, we're not far from Chicago, so homeless people from Chicago come over here as well. We actually have shelters for the homeless. Like specifically, I know there's men homeless shelters. I'm pretty sure there's women's and children's homeless shelters too. My husband actually used to work for one of them, and they would get kicked out. Like some of them would get kicked out because they just didn't care. Like they had no motivation to make themselves better. And like those were the ones that still roam the streets in the summer because they got kicked out and they're more worried about alcohol than anything else. And so they go and terrorize the art district here. So, and that made it interesting, at least inspiration for one of my books. But still.
Yeah, that's just very sad when they have to resort to that. The ones who generally want to get help can get the help if they want to get it. You know what I mean? It's just that in your case, the individuals you're talking about were choosing to let their own problems get the best of them.
Yeah, and I do know somebody who used to be homeless, and she is in a much better place now. She improved herself, she turned herself around, and she is doing great. And I am very proud of her.
That's good to hear. Many of these military scammers, they pretend to be homeless sometimes too. And like Justin said, real military people who are homeless, they have the options to get help with that. It should be a big red flag that you're being scammed is when they start playing a sympathy card with you and they start telling you that they're homeless and they need money to get a home. Yeah, that's most likely a scam right there.
The VA has a library of authorized home lenders that can go in and give them a loan with nothing down. 0 down home loans, 100% financing, with interest rates easily 3 or 4 percentage points below anything else you'd find in the mortgage industry by the VA, as long as you're receiving appropriate benefits and you were not dishonorably discharged.
Right. And again, those are things that these scammers have no knowledge about. They're just going out there and pretending that they are who they say they are without any knowledge of how it really works.
Well, that leads up to my next question, actually, for Justin. You mentioned some things that I knew about being available to the veterans and some, like the housing thing you just mentioned. If there are obviously, unfortunately, truly homeless veterans, but if these things are made available to them, such as the opportunity to get a home, and yeah, they definitely deserve the benefits that they earned. If they are homeless, how do they go about finding this type of information out and being able to get the months and months to years of correspondence that usually goes along with it, especially when, I guess, when it comes to getting benefits?
There are certified 501c3 charities that actually specialize in this with the VA, the National Association of Black Veterans. There's also the American Legion, or two of the well-known ones. I forget, there's a couple others, but I forget what those are offhand, but there's a list of them at va.gov.
Do you think that it truly is a situation where they're there? What side do you weigh in on more, I'm asking? Is it that they don't want to get their benefits when they have the opportunity to, or is it on the flip side where they just don't know how to go by obtaining them or know that they have them available if they are homeless?
So some of them may not know what they got available, and some of them threw away all their paperwork. And the VA is actually very responsible with this. And the VA assumes that you have no paperwork on hand because of being a veteran, because they assume you probably have been all over the planet and have no idea where your paperwork might be. They will actually, if you go in there with just a state ID card, can help you hunt down your service records and get all of your information put together in one place and get you the benefits you qualify for. All you have to do, if you're a veteran, is go in there and talk to them. They will talk to you. You just can't have tested positive within the last 14 days for COVID.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's all some very useful information, too, that the general public needs to be aware about. Knowing about how the housing process works. Should a discharged veteran, or a retired veteran for that matter, is interested in looking into getting a home, so homelessness is not an option for them. These scammers don't have any knowledge of how that works, and they're just going to write you a letter telling you, I need money for a home, I'm going to be homeless, or something like that. And then on top of that, they're just going to keep talking about how much they're in love with you, and they're just going to keep saying it at warp speed over and over again. They're just going to put so much emphasis on the fact that they are in love with you, and they just want you to send them that money so they could supposedly get out of their housing crisis.
Well, what the scammers in that scenario are trying to do is brainwash you into thinking that they're telling you the truth. And that's what scammers spend their time doing, is trying to figure out new and better ways to brainwash people into doing what they should not.
That's the general basics of any scam. They just want to brainwash you into believing that everything they say is right, you are never to question them, and you are just to give in. And that's why even with these tech support scams, they get really angry when you try to tell them that you don't want to give them access to your computer, you don't want to show them your bank. And then with the other types of scams involving the SSA, the Social Security Administration, they'll threaten you with arrest if you don't give in to them, pretending to be some kind of federal officer. They'll even try to scare you by telling you things like, why are you trying to run away from the situation? Do you want to go to jail? It's all just a form of brainwashing in general. Without brainwashing and intimidation, there is no scam.
Well, yeah, and the thing of it is that they're trying to use your emotions against you.
Right.
Specifically in the case of brainwashing, they're trying to use fear as a weapon.
Right.
And a lot of dictatorship regimes will do this, where what they'll do is they will cause people that are in their country to not understand what free will truly is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really sad thing, to be in a situation where you don't understand what free will is.
That's right. I want you to think that you don't have any when you're talking to them, that you have to give in to what they're saying. They try to make themselves look as legit as they can. When you know the overall basics of how these scams work and what the red flags are, then it becomes harder to, if not impossible, to fall for them.
Yes, and I find that the government, while they have made a lot of very impressive strides over the years at getting better at educating the public, there's always a lot more that they need to be sharing with why and how the system really works, especially in the case of how it works for veterans.
Mm-hmm.
So that people understand that scammers are lying when they claim that they're going to be a homeless veteran.
Right.
That shouldn't have to be happening.
No.
And they do not seem to want to explain to people that the reason that this scammer is a liar is because they have these housing resources available for veterans to take advantage of.
Right.
And I think that's one of the more severe oversights, is that they don't put enough emphasis on making sure that the person you're talking to is actually who they claim they are. And that's what it comes down to, is the scammer will try to convince you that they are who they claim to be.
Mm-hmm.
If you do not believe the scammer to be who they claim they are, you've won half the battle already.
Right.
Because if you're wary enough that they can't convince you that they're actually that disabled veteran, then they're fighting a losing battle trying to get money out of you. And that will really piss them off, and then they will get very off color.
I was just going to say another battle percentage of that battle that victims can do to help themselves, of course, is be aware of the information that you give to them or make available to them. If they find you on social media, you've got your public profile out there with your pictures, your weddings, your funerals, etc., anything that the scammer can use that to get inside your mind and help belittle you and intimidate you, or even take control over you with it. That's this information that you've given them, when you can easily limit it to who you want to share it with, if anyone.
Yes, and I'm really a believer in keeping certain information private, especially on social media. One of the biggest things that I think you should never put on social media for public viewing is the year of your birthday. Maybe okay to put the month and day for your friends to know, but please do not have the year you were born shown as public information on your profile. That is one of the top things you can do for your information security. And I don't think that any information security guru would disagree.
Yeah.
Another thing would be, don't register your social media through your phone number, because that's how people can look you up by your number, even if it's scammers, just randomly typing in numbers. So they can see, if they see whatever is public on your page, like if they see you have a grandfather that's also in your friends list that's in your little family, and they can find their number, they can call them, and a scammer that does the, what's that scam where they pretend that you're either in jail or been kidnapped, that's how they get that information.
Yeah.
And that's one of the more disgusting scams that's out there.
Yeah.
Horrible.
Unfortunately, it's becoming more common because scammers have no scruples.
Nope. They don't. They're heartless. They don't care. One thing that I was told by a colleague of mine is that whenever you're handling scammers, you don't want to be too forceful with them or too revealing with them. You don't want to be too abrasive with them, because you don't know what they could do to you if you really make one mad enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, because they will hack your social media. They have the time, they have the tools, unfortunately. They have the willpower to get nasty enough to really do some damage.
That's right.
If you get their ire raised high enough, they'll go after you with everything they've got, and they can do a lot of damage in a short amount of time with identity fraud.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times it can be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to convince places you weren't the one to open that account.
But the reason why they have so much time to do all this is because they won't go to work. They spend all their time at home pretending to be somebody that they're not. Yeah, and they have all this time to mess around with. That's what makes it even scarier.
It's like the scammers say the trilogy comes across, I've come across, other scammers have come across. They always use these lame excuses, well, I can't find anything, I can't do anything. When it's like, I was at a point where I was stuck in retail because it was better than scamming and stealing from some people. These scammers are just using excuses.
Yes.
Lame, pathetic excuses.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm too honest. I am. I can't scam someone for the life of me because I'm just too honest.
Same here. One thing that people need to look out for when trying to spot one of these scams, these military scams, is that, for one thing, I'm looking on their website here, is that servicemen and servicewomen serving overseas will often have an APO or an FPO mailing address. And Justin, can you elaborate a little more on what that means?
That's a base responsible for handling all correspondence for the veteran or service member in that particular zone. What that means is any correspondence that needs to be mailed to that person, to the service member, has to go through that FPO, APO box, because if it's not sent through there, the veteran or service member is never going to receive it because of military mail rules.
Right. They do say to be very suspicious if you never get to speak with the person on the phone, or you're told you can't write letters to them, because apparently you can write letters to them, just not directly. It has to go through to the APO or the FPO mailing address.
Yes, because it has to be authorized, and quite often they will read what the mail that is sent to the service members to make sure that the service member will actually be able to mentally function in the combat zone. If it's a notification about a wedding or a divorce proceeding, they require that those kinds of letters be reviewed by the base commander of the deployment zone for the service member before the service member is allowed to be notified, so that combat readiness and force lethality is not affected adversely by personal problems of individual soldiers.
Right.
Can you send like care packages as well to people in the army? Because my mum and her friend, when my brother was in the army years ago, they sorted out a load of care packages for people going to Afghanistan.
You can, but it has to go through the same APO, FPO boxes.
Yeah,
but typically, if you're going to do that, what you'd want to do is get your church group together and send 300 or 400 of them so that the entire company can have one, because some veterans don't have family domestically that can look after them in that kind of manner.
Yeah.
And I think that's the case for far too many service members, that they would not receive a care package if it weren't for churches doing that kind of thing, or entire companies.
And servicemen and women are not allowed to receive money through the mail, right?
No, they are not.
Right.
They're given a monthly salary, and that is what they're allowed to use if they are spending money locally in the combat zone. They are required to use their military monthly salary, which that information, I believe, is public. You can look it up on the government website. And they require that you have access to that money no matter where you go on in the world. They will not actually let you deploy to basic training unless you have at least got a debit card or a checking account with checks. They prefer that you have a debit card, and if you don't have an account with a debit card that you can use, they will open one for you with the Armed Forces Bank. Your NCO has the ability, no matter what your credit rating is, if you get accepted for induction, they actually have the authority to open a bank account for you so you can receive your debit card in the mail 2 or 3 days after you show up for basic, where they'll give you a gift card that you're supposed to spend on your gear until you get your debit card when you first get there to basic training. So you will have a debit card that is active that you will use at basic, and they require that you pay for a haircut every week you're at basic.
That's very important to know, because one of the biggest red flags, of course, with involving these scams is sending money. And you're supposed to be suspicious if they ask you to send money or ship property, especially if it's to a third-party company. And that doesn't make sense at all. Why would you send money to a third party when it's supposed to go directly to the military, right?
Yeah. If you want to give money to a service member, the best thing that you can do is try to encourage them through letters to them to get them to behave in a way that gets them a promotion. That is the best way to get a service member to earn more money, is to get them to behave in a way that gets them promoted up the chain of command.
Right. Which is obviously something these scammers aren't going to be doing. If anything, they're dragging themselves right to the jailhouse.
Yes. There are often veterans who will be single when they move out of their parents' house, and they'll have the money sitting in their account and they won't touch it while they're deployed.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a nice little nest egg sitting there when they get home 36 months later.
Right.
Plus, the military does a lot of interesting things. Did you know that they will actually pay for college?
Yes.
Units actually are rewarded scholarships to pay for soldiers to go to college at no cost to the service member.
Mm-hmm. That's right. I've known a few veterans who I went to college with who were there, and their college was fully paid for up to graduation. Some of them were Army, some of them were Marines. But yes, that's correct.
It's applicable across all branches: the Army, the Navy, the Marine, the National Guard, Air Force, and Space Force all pay for you to attend college.
Do the Army also pay for soldiers to go on a 2-week holiday after they've been to war?
I don't know, but I don't think so.
Because my brother made up, I don't know if because my brother is a compulsive liar, he's been sectioned for it and everything, but he said that the Army paid for him to have a 2-week holiday after going to Afghanistan.
I don't think that's the case, but I wouldn't really know because I was never actively deployed overseas.
Yeah.
I ended up discharged out of basic training because I developed a psychiatric disorder as a result of basic training. So I don't know how it works for those who have been deployed and come home from the war zone. That's some of the stuff that I'm only telling you what I know from my experience, but I don't think they do that.
Yeah, I didn't think so either, but you never know.
Certain things that soldiers in general are not charged for, or as we've discussed, they're not charged so they can go on leave. They are not charged for medical costs directly since they have the medical insurance themselves. So that means you shouldn't have to send money to them. And then of course, you can't mail money to them. One major red flag is that sometimes scammers will claim to be soldiers who found large sums of money during their time overseas. And what does the U.S. Army Critical Division of Investigations have to say about this? They say that deployed soldiers do not find large sums of money, and they don't need your help, any financial help, to help you get out of that country. That's a big lie right there.
Because when you're deployed to a war zone, the military considers it the responsibility of your commanding officer to make sure you have a way home should you need it.
Right.
Completion of your term.
They also can't ask the general public for help with food either. Sometimes the scammers will say that they need food to eat while they're out there on the battlefield. It's a big lie if they're asking you to help them pay for food, right?
Yes, because they are provided all the food that they are allowed to have, and they actually are required to follow a very specific combat readiness diet.
Right.
They actually will not allow you to send perishable goods through the mail, and that is actually one of the reasons why, especially if you try to send it to an APO, FPO, because it'll never make it to the veteran because they will throw it away.
Right.
Because before the veteran gets it, it will spoil.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. These are all little tidbits of information that the general public certainly needs to be aware of. I really wish that the Criminal Investigation Division's website and this page outlining these scams has all the stuff that you're talking to us about, because a lot of people, again, aren't going to understand this. They don't mention this on their website. They mention a list of red flags, but they don't talk about specifically how it works over to where the general public, a general civilian, can understand it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's critical that I'm stepping forward out of basically the military shadows to shine a big spotlight on how this is going to be.
Right.
Through this forum, because people who watch this on YouTube and the other podcast forums this will be uploaded to, when they watch it, they're going to find that there's a lot of information they didn't know before.
Right.
And they'll probably want to share this with other people who have issues with falling for military profiles or supposedly military profiles of scammers.
Right. And speaking of that, now that people understand that active service members don't have access to the internet at all, then they need to know that they won't find them on social media. The emails they get should be false because they have no access to email. And of course, they will not be found on any online dating sites, predicated on the fact that they don't have access to the internet at all while they're deployed.
And I was not allowed to access my Facebook page until after a couple of days after my discharge, because I had to sleep off the side effects of being through basic training for 4 months.
Right,
Which
right.
means I basically ended up recycled twice, is what they call it when you have to go through basic a second time. It's called recycling.
I'm very sorry to hear that you had to go through training twice and then you had to get honorably discharged. But, you know, things do happen. You did your best. And thankfully, you're here with us now to share all this valuable information.
Exactly, and I think that's one of the things that's mission critical, that I wish more of us veterans would step forward and tell people how the system really works.
Right. For one thing, other things that I learned from this list of red flags was that general officers will not correspond with you on behalf of a soldier planning to take leave. So a lot of times these scammers pretend to be these so-called, as they word them, general officers. They won't correspond with you on behalf of a soldier. Soldiers are not charged money or taxes to secure communications or leave. Again, they can't have any type of smart device or anything that could access the internet on their person during their time while they're serving. They've also mentioned that soldiers do not need permission to get married. Of course, you can't get married while you're overseas deployed. The scammers are going to try to tell you that once they get home, they need permission to get married first, even after they've come home and they've already served. So that's another lie right there.
It's decided on a case-by-case basis because they have to make sure that it's actually going to be for the long haul and for the right reasons.
What would be an example of reasons or on a case-by-case basis?
Now, this happens more often than it should, but a lot of soldiers will fall for having intimate relations with some local girl and want to make an honest woman out of her and bring them home. And that's decided on a case-by-case basis depending on whether they did it while they were supposed to be on patrol or whether they did it during their downtime, which is really quite minimal.
I see, yes.
And some of them receive dishonorable discharges over their behavior because of sleeping with the enemy.
Right. It's sad that that happens sometimes. Yeah. I mean, these scammers will try to make you think that they need this overall permission or they need money from you to get married, which of course is a big lie in its own. And, you know, that's a huge lie on its own right there. They'll try to pull your heartstrings to make you think that they need to pay in order to retire early. That doesn't make sense either. Other twists that they pull on this scam include trying to sell the person that they're talking to a car or some kind of privately owned vehicle, and then they'll try to make you think that military aircraft can deliver them. Now, that doesn't make sense at all either. Why would the military be involved in someone's personal matters, right?
Well, actually, believe it or not, they require you to have a valid driver's license before they'll take you on these days because they were finding out that too many recruits were showing up and couldn't drive. So now they require you to have a valid driver's license. But they also have certain rules about what makes and what years you can buy and limits on the interest rate you're to pay. And a lot of shady car salesmen will try to sell cars to young bloods that just joined up who have no idea how to negotiate with a car salesman because those people are, in my opinion, can be their own form of sleaze, separate from the whole military scam sleaze.
I was going to say that. You're right about that. That's a whole different topic for another show, but I definitely agree with you that that's another scam that actually targets military people. That would be active military people or people who just got out on the other end.
I've got something to say to that. My brother, right, he was 16 when he went into the army, and apparently they taught him to drive. Yet after he came out of the army, he ripped off about 5 different cars before he gave up driving. So I don't actually think he had a driving license. I think he might have faked that because I don't know if the army do teach you to drive.
Well, they used to, but they don't anymore.
Okay, but yeah, my brother.
Depending on your military operational specialty, they depending on your military operational specialty, they will teach you how to drive a tank or specialized military equipment. But a regular car like a Toyota, a Honda, or Ford, they're not going to teach you that.
Yeah.
That's a whole different set of skills.
They assume that you already know how to drive. That's why they want you to have a driver's license. They don't want to have to go that extra mile to teach you that.
Yeah. And they actually have, for veterans who don't have valid driver's licenses, the VA, at least in my area, actually has special training that you can take to get your driver's license if you don't have one and you're a veteran receiving care from the VA. They actually do have a driver's training program to get you a valid driver's license in your state if you have the mental and physical capacity to safely operate a vehicle.
Right.
Domestically.
And speaking of driver's licenses, one thing that I've noticed people will do to validate the person that they're talking to is ask for a driver's license, but that's not really a good step in trying to find out if they're really that person, because they can pretend to be anybody they want. They could steal a driver's license from someone, send that to their victim, and then the victim will think that that's the person they're talking to. It happens all the time with so many different scams.
Yeah, and driver license numbers are a matter of public record. It's not a private number.
Mm-hmm.
And every cop in the nation has the ability to look those up within 15 minutes. They'll know if you have any outstanding warrants anywhere in the system in the 48.
Right. That's true. They can look you up just like that. That's why some people who skip jury duty end up getting arrested when they get pulled over for something, because it's on their record.
Yeah, and that's why you should not skip jury duty. If you have a conviction on your record, they take you out of the eligible jury duty pool.
Right. That's true. They only want clean people serving.
And there's valid reasons for that.
Yeah, I definitely see what they're trying to do. I want to go ahead and start getting ready to close the show. Does anybody have any remarks that they'd like to share with us? Any questions for Justin about these scams? Any personal experiences that they might have had in the past?
The only thing I could think of is also going along the lines of him talking about the car salesman and stuff, is multi-level marketing. Mm-hmm. One of their main targets is women who were in the military or women who are wives of somebody in the military. I have noticed that's one of their main targets. They have quite a few targets, but that is one of them. Making them feel like they're important, that they can retire their husbands from their duty and stuff. I've noticed that's one of their targets.
And it's unfortunate that way too many of these wives buy into that. Most of the men who are serving are there because they want to be, not because they didn't have another option.
Oh, yeah.
Most of those men went over there on purpose because they couldn't figure out what else they wanted to do in life, or they were just too angry to function in a 9-to-5.
And I'm sure there's some there that just wanted to serve their country, too.
Yeah, there's a lot of us who just want to serve our country.
Well, I thank you for coming on the show today to share with us all this valuable information. I guarantee you that people who are trying to find out more about these scams, they're not going to find this information anywhere else. You've shared a lot of good insider tidbits of information that everybody needs to know about, but they won't know about unless they listen to the show. Sadly, the resources online do not cover it with the detail and depth that you've given us today. So I greatly appreciate you coming on today to talk to us about all of that.
Well, it was my pleasure because I want to fight scammers in any way I can, and by spreading this information and the limited spread it's starting out with. When this goes public later on, I think it's going to be interesting when people listen to this, just how much insider information that they're going to find rather interesting, especially for those who have family who are deployed, about why they seem to be not answering their phone. Because the military bases do have special phones that soldiers can occasionally, a couple times a month or maybe once a week, use to contact their family domestically.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not a universal thing because of the way phone grids are these days, especially in third world countries that have yet to invent dial-up. And a lot of that's going to be based on satellite communications. And because you're sharing it with about 500 to 600 other people, you're not going to be able to spend a lot of time on.
Right. All of this information has been very useful, and I've learned a lot of new things personally myself. I would like to ask the rest of the panel, what was the biggest piece of information that stood out to you the most? What has Justin shared with you guys today that really stood out to you that you didn't know before we had this show?
Oh, I was just going to say, I mentioned it earlier, was I was unaware of the house funding situation that had been made available to me.
Yeah, and that can be a great benefit to take a veteran off the streets, because the streets can be a real mean place to be.
Mm-hmm. That's right. They can be very dangerous.
I think everything that Justin said today has been an eye-opener, really, because there's been a lot of things that we didn't know. Well, I didn't
Yeah, I agree with
know.
that too. Very much.
Right. And like I said, this is all information you're not going to find anywhere else. I've looked on a few other websites when I was researching the topic before we did the show. Even the Army's own page from their Criminal Investigations Division doesn't talk about it in this detail. This is all very important. It elaborates on some of the points that I've read on their page about what to look out for. That's what Justin did. He elaborated on what they said you should look out for. They were very vague about it, and he brought us more information about what everybody should know. To understand the mechanics of how all these scams work, to understand how you're talking to a scammer and not somebody who's actively in the military or a veteran. And I would like to close with just one more question for you, Justin. What percentage of these scammers, based on what you know, pretend to be active service personnel versus veterans who are retired?
I really wouldn't know percentage, because I don't typically get targeted by these scams.
Right.
Because I'm a former service member, so they know that I know what's up, so they kind of tend to leave my profile alone.
Right.
See, my friends and I, they probably more target us. They try to add me on Facebook. I don't allow it. That's one thing. Don't add anybody to Facebook you don't know.
True.
Unless, you get to know them and you have a way of seeing their face and everything. Because I met some quite nice people, like through YouTube and other Facebook groups and stuff. But I would say, I think, from what we have encountered, probably about a little bit more veterans, a little bit less active. Probably, I would say, like 45-55. Would be my guess from what I've experienced with messing with scammers.
That's another thing I was going to tell everybody as well who's listening. To everybody listening who just heard that statement, take your Facebook profiles, set them to private, only allow your friends to see what you share, and don't add anybody you don't know. There's no reason for you to add somebody you don't know. Chances are these are romance scammers, and I've seen them before myself. I've had fake people try to add me before too, and I just simply reject the friend request. I'm not going to add somebody that I don't know because we don't know who they are. And most of the time, they look like they are scam profiles. And how do I know? I open them up. I see, first of all, that I don't have any mutual friends. They have one picture posted up, and that's their profile picture. And they don't have any posts on their timeline. The timeline just shows that they just made the profile. Yeah, that's a scammer right there.
Yeah, I've had a lot on Instagram, a lot of fakes, and I'm funny. I don't add anyone, even if I know them. I very rarely accept someone unless I know I speak to them or they're genuine enough.
You're very smart to do that, Lauren. That is advice I wish more people would take to heart. Too many people like to make themselves look big by adding all these followers as if they're somebody famous. They're nobody famous. These young people that try to do that, they're not famous, so quit trying to look famous. Nobody even knows who you are, right?
Yeah. Anybody on my list who's not part of Anti-Scammer League or Trilogy Media who's on my friends list is someone who I actually know offline.
Right, that's right, yeah. And my friends list consists of people that I knew back when I was in high school, from college, from my past jobs, and then of course, many of the people I know from Trilogy Media Squad.
Yeah, well, someone from school tried to add me recently, and obviously I haven't been in school for like 16 years. But I tried to talk to her, and she ignored me, so I blocked her. Well, if you're just going to add me just to look my profile up, I can't be bothered.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, I think we should only add people who we know are legit, and don't add strangers. Most of the time, these strangers who hit you up out of the blue that you don't know, they're scammers just trying to prey on you. Chances are they thought you looked beautiful, you looked handsome, and that they want to just try to scam you out of all your money. That's how it starts first.
Yep.
Yeah, because the core problem with scammers is greed.
Yes.
And they're not willing to achieve their wealth in an honest manner.
Exactly. Exactly. To any scammers who are listening to this show right now, who may have happened to stumble across this show, get a job!
Yeah.
That's my final word to any scammers who may have stumbled upon this episode of the show. Well, once again, I would like to thank you, Justin, for coming on the show today. It's been a pleasure. You've shared so much useful information. This is going to be one of our greatest episodes yet because of how much was shared, how much depth you gave us versus what you'll find when just trying to research these scams online. Thank you, Justin.
My pleasure. I really think that more veterans ought to step forward and spread this type of information to their friends and family so that this information develops a presence on the internet.
I agree. Veterans should collab with their local VA office to try to spread awareness that way, too.
I agree, because scams are not going to go away. As long as there's evil in the world, scams are going to be right.
That's true.
And fighting scams is a full-time job. And I think that in this limited way that I'm beginning to help shine a light on exactly how military scams work and why you should not believe anybody who claims they're a service member online needing help to get home.
Right.
Because they don't.
That's right.
Because once your leave is approved, it can take you 6 weeks to get home, unless there's some kind of emergency scenario going on in which they may speed things up.
Very well said. A great way to summarize all of the points we've covered. Basically, you can't send money to get a soldier to come home. That should be in everybody's minds. And I would also like to conclude by saying this in summary. If somebody claiming to be military contacts you and asks for money, don't send the money. Block the person. Don't send them anything. They're not a real veteran. They're not an active service personnel. Thanks once again, Justin, and to all my guests who joined me today. This will wrap up another episode of the CDG BizCast.
Thanks, Christian.
Yeah, it was a very good show today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thanks, Justin.
You guys are awesome.